This video is part of the You Protagonist series. Here, you don't just listen to a story. You live it, feel it in every detail and emotion. With every scene, every decision, you are the main character of this story. And to help you see yourself in every moment, the protagonist's face never appears. So take a deep breath, close your eyes if you want, and get ready to feel it all as if it were real. The desert heat hit your face the moment you opened the balcony door. A dry wind carried the scent of spices and hot sand. The sky was a deep, endless blue, and the horizon looked infinite. A painful contrast to how you felt inside. That quiet tightness, like you didn't belong, even though technically you were in the right place. You wondered once again how your life had brought you here. So far from home, from everything you once knew, surrounded by a culture that was both fascinating and mysterious, and yet still feeling like a misplaced piece in some ancient puzzle. The days were filled with silence, and at night, the loneliness echoed with thoughts you tried hard to hide. There was beauty all around you, but it didn't fill the void. You weren't running from a place. You were running from feelings that kept trying to catch up. Deep down, what really hurt was the lack of meaning. That lingering feeling of waiting for something that might never come. But something inside you still pulsed, strong. A craving for something new, more real, more intense. Maybe it was a little crazy to accept that offer to work here for a while. But there was something about the unknown that called to you. And you, tired of your predictable life, chose to listen. In the distance, the palace towers cut through the sky. That's where you'd spend the next few weeks, working as an interpreter and cultural mediator for an international event hosted by the local royal family. A rare opportunity, and a quiet risk, though you had no idea just how big. The Sheikh, you'd heard of him before. A powerful man, ruthless, wrapped in rumors and mystery. They said he ruled like a king and loved like the desert, with distance, scarcity, and fire. He had vowed never to marry a foreigner, never to give his heart to someone outside his world. You didn't think of him personally. He was just a distant figure, a shadow with a grand name. But still, something inside you, no matter how hard you tried to resist, sensed that your presence there wasn't a coincidence. That morning, while staring out at the endless desert, a chill ran across your skin. And it wasn't from the wind. It felt like destiny itself was holding its breath, waiting for you to take the first step. You didn't know it yet, but your days of loneliness were numbered. Not because someone was coming to rescue you, but because soon you'd be forced to face truths even the desert couldn't hide. Truths about yourself, about love, and about the boundaries you never imagined you'd cross. You walked down the marble steps in the grand lobby, hearing your own footsteps echo louder than they should have. Every click of your heels on the floor felt like it announced your presence, even though you'd have preferred to go unnoticed. The place was stunning. Tall columns with golden arabesques, carpets that looked like masterpieces, and a soft scent in the air, somewhere between incense and orange blossom. That's where you saw him for the first time. He was facing away from you, speaking with two men in dark suits. His stance was commanding, broad shoulders, straight spine, authority radiating from him even in silence. And when he turned around, his eyes locked onto yours like he already knew exactly where you'd be. And for a moment, everything else around you disappeared. That gaze. It wasn't just a glance. It cut straight through your defenses, stripping away the invisible armor you'd worn for so long. There was no warmth there, no friendliness. Just power, control. And in some strange way, it stirred something deep inside you. He didn't smile. He just looked at you, studying you, like a man sizing up the depth of a river before crossing it. "The foreigner has arrived," he said, low, but loud enough for those around to hear. Then he gave you a small nod. "Welcome. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." You didn't respond right away. Your mind scrambled to process the sarcasm wrapped in politeness, and you felt the heat rise up your neck. This wasn't the greeting you expected, and definitely not the man you had pictured. He wasn't just the Sheikh. He was a man who clearly had no patience for weakness or questions. At dinner that evening, organized to introduce the event participants, you were seated strategically to his left. Everything was exquisite: colorful dishes, silver cutlery, soft instrumental music playing in the background. But you could barely taste a thing. His presence felt like it weighed on you the entire time. Every question he asked came with a hidden test, and with every answer you gave, he offered a measured reaction. It was like he was searching for a flaw, trying to confirm his theory that you were just another curious Westerner, dazzled by castles and camels. But you weren't that, and little by little he seemed to notice. During one glance that lasted a little too long, he leaned slightly toward you and said, "Foreigners come and go, the desert remains." You gently bit your lip before answering, calmly, "Maybe." But even the desert bows to the right kind of rain. For a second, something shifted in his eyes, like he hadn't expected that. Like, for the first time in a long while, someone dared to meet him on equal ground. The tension was sealed, not with raised voices, but with silence, with glances, with short phrases that said more than entire paragraphs. You felt it. He did too. And as the night came to a close, and the guests slowly dispersed, he walked you to the entrance of the hall. For a moment, the night breeze swept between the two of you like a whisper, carrying something new, something dangerous. "Be careful," he said, his tone almost gentle but still firm. "Some places burn those who don't know the rules of fire." You simply nodded, not breaking eye contact. You didn't yet know what that warning meant, but something in you was already burning, and it wasn't fear. You left that hall with your heart racing, unsure if you'd just crossed a line, or if he had drawn one specifically for you to step over. The following days passed like whispers across your skin. You woke up to sunlight slipping through white linen curtains and the smell of cardamom coffee filling the room. But nothing felt simple there. Everything carried a weight, as if every gesture, every glance, every word came with an unspoken subtext. And him, he seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. You'd see him at meetings, in the palace corridors, at formal dinners, always composed, always distant, always watching you with that unreadable expression. There was something about the way he looked at you that made your body react before your mind could understand it. A shiver down your spine, a sudden shortness of breath, as if his presence rearranged the air around you. But it was when he wasn't there that truly threw you off balance, because that's when you noticed you were waiting for him, thinking about him, looking for signs that he might be fighting the same pull growing between you two. One afternoon, while walking through the palace's inner gardens, you found him alone, sitting under the shade of an old palm tree. The traditional garments he wore made him seem even more unreachable, like he belonged to a world you were only allowed to admire from the outside. But when he saw you, he didn't pull away, didn't look away. He just watched you in silence. "I don't usually get visitors here," he said, his voice low but steady. "I didn't know the garden was off limits," you replied, trying to sound composed, even though your hands betrayed your tension. He tilted his head slightly, studying your reactions. "Everything here has an owner, even silence." You sat a few steps away, respecting the invisible line he always kept around himself. And then you stayed quiet with him, for long minutes, just listening to the sound of the fountain's water, feeling the warm touch of the late afternoon sun, and the weight of words left unspoken. It was there, out of nowhere, that he mentioned his father. Briefly, dryly. He said he learned early on that trust is a luxury no man in power can afford, and that love, well, love was a sign of weakness and a dangerous distraction. You didn't say anything back, but something inside you quietly cracked, because now you understood. He wasn't just cold. He was someone who had learned to survive by building walls, and you, unintentionally, had become the first crack in that armor. That night, alone in your room, you thought of his eyes, of that veiled confession, and something inside you stirred. You didn't want to feel it, but you already did. A confusing mix of compassion, desire, and fear. He was a man who could shatter hearts with the same care he held a crystal glass, with firmness, but no tenderness. And still, it was him you thought of before falling asleep. And that scared you, the feelings that were starting to take shape. The next morning, while walking through the main corridor, you overheard two maids whispering. They were talking about him, mentioning an arranged marriage he had canceled years ago, leaving a princess teetering on the edge of humiliation. They said that since then, he had vowed never to give himself to someone who hadn't been raised within the traditions of his people. You pretended not to hear it, but each word stuck to you like a thorn under your skin. You weren't from here, and you never would be. So, you started avoiding casual encounters, or at least tried to. But every time your eyes met his, it was like the ground shifted beneath your feet. You could tell he noticed it too, even if he kept pretending he didn't care. But there was too much tension in his gestures for that to be true. That morning, you received an informal message, discreetly delivered by one of the palace aides, an invitation to accompany him on a visit to a nearby village, where a traditional welcoming ritual for foreigners was taking place. It was strange. He never extended that kind of invitation. Officially, any of the diplomats could have gone in his place. But he wanted you. In the car, the silence between you was nearly tangible. The desert landscape slid past the window like a golden hypnotic sea, and for the first time, he seemed more human. Watching the horizon, adjusting the sleeves of his tunic now and then with distracted gestures. But his eyes didn't lie. He was conflicted. "You seem uncomfortable," he said, still looking out the window. "I'm just trying to understand what I'm doing here with you," you replied honestly. He closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep breath, like your words had reached a place inside him no one else ever touched. The visit went smoothly. Polite smiles, formal introductions, plenty of reverence. But something inside you was restless. And that restlessness only grew stronger when, later that afternoon, you returned to the car to grab something and overheard a conversation by accident. Two men, high-ranking members of the palace staff, were speaking in Arabic, a language you understood better than they assumed. "He's playing with fire." "A foreigner? This is madness. He's not going to marry her. He just wants to prove he still has control and have a little fun." You ducked out of sight before they saw you, heart pounding in your chest. A fog of indignation, hurt, and humiliation swept over you. Was that it? Was this what it all meant? Were you just an exotic distraction for a man who had sworn never to love someone like you? When he returned to the car, you avoided looking at him, and he noticed. Did something happen? You only shook your head, staring out at the desert ahead, as if it could give you the answers the Sheikh wouldn't. That night, you skipped dinner, locked yourself in your room, and, for the first time since arriving, cried there. Not out of sadness, but out of rage. Rage at yourself for believing in something, for wanting more, and starting to build feelings that should never have existed. Hours later, he knocked on your door. One firm knock, followed by silence. You didn't respond. "I don't know what you heard. But I've always been good at keeping boundaries," he said through the door, voice quieter than ever. "But with you, mine are falling apart." You leaned against the door, face still warm from the tears, feeling his breath close, yet still too far away. "Don't worry. I'm just here to do my job," you whispered, knowing he would hear you. On the other side, silence. No reply. Only the slow sound of his footsteps walking away. But something in the way he paused before leaving told you. He was breaking inside. And that scared you more than any rejection. You swore to yourself you'd pull away. But fate, just like him, doesn't take orders. The night air was thick with myrrh and sweet tobacco as you descended the marble stairs toward the inner courtyard. You'd insisted on being alone, but a servant had shown up carrying a brief message. "Meet me in the greenhouse." Nothing else, just the slanted handwriting you could recognize even in the dark. Your first impulse was to ignore it. The second, stronger, more visceral, was to go. Just to prove to yourself you could still say no if you wanted to. The greenhouse sat at the back of the palace, hidden behind walls draped in bougainvillea. Inside, amber lights glowed over rows of desert roses, star jasmine, and dwarf date palms. The damp scent of earth mixed with the sweetness of flowers, creating a warm haze that clung to your skin. You never imagined the desert could smell so alive. He was leaning against a gardener's table, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with fine soil. When he looked up, his expression was different from anything he'd shown before. Vulnerable, like something inside him had been stripped of its armor. "I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do." His voice was low, almost a growl, contained by the fear of being overheard beyond the glass walls. "But I need you to know. Their words don't define my intentions." You stood just a few steps away, feeling the heat radiating from him blend with the warmth of the greenhouse. Your heart beat in places that felt unfamiliar, and the anger that had burned through you now mingled with something far more dangerous. Tenderness. "Then tell me what they are," you said, almost breathless. "Because I'm tired of trying to guess." He slowly reached out, like he was approaching a wild bird. His fingertips touched your wrist, sliding into your palm. The jolt was electric, burning slow and deep, like embers beneath your skin. You felt the tension leave your body, replaced by something that was desire and fear all at once. "There was no space in my life for someone like you," he confessed, locking eyes with you. "But somehow, you've taken up all of it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken breath, the sound of blood rushing in your ears, and the low hum of fans spinning above the plants. He gently lifted your chin, and for a moment, the world shrank to the scent of his skin and the tremble in your bones. Just as your lips were about to touch, a metallic explosion shattered the moment. The crack of glass struck by something from outside. You both pulled back. Voices outside. Rushed footsteps. Alarms blaring faintly in distant hallways. Within seconds, 2 guards burst in, slamming the doors shut. One spoke quickly in Arabic, words you understood well enough. Photographers had breached the outer perimeter. There had been flashes behind the greenhouse glass. Someone would leak photos of the two of you before sunrise. His face hardened, but his eyes stayed on you, not out of shame, but concern. The ruthless armor of the Sheikh returned, but now it bore the weight of fear that everything was about to fall apart. "We need to get out of here," he said, gripping your hand tightly this time. "Before they turn this into a scandal." Your heart pounded even harder. One part of you screamed to let go, to retreat to safety, far from headlines, far from an impossible love. But every cell in your body begged to run with him, no matter the consequences. Between the burst of camera flashes and the palace's shadows, your hand closed around his, not knowing whether it was a goodbye or the first step towards something that could consume you both completely. You ran through the palace halls like silent shadows, the guards' shouts echoing through the rooms as they searched for more intruders, their voices growing louder like a rising wave. The Sheikh held your hand firmly, but never roughly, as if he needed your touch just as badly as you needed his. He led you to a hidden door behind a carved wooden screen. It opened into a narrow passage lit only by oil lanterns. The air was filled with the scent of damp stone and sandalwood. Each step echoed through your chest, like your heartbeat was pressed against your skin. "It's an old path," he whispered, "used by our ancestors to leave the palace unseen." With every turn, the tension between you grew heavier, almost tangible. The silence between you said everything words dared not. When you finally emerged from the tunnel into a low, secluded room with cushions scattered on the floor and sheer curtains swaying in the breeze, He stopped and looked at you, as if seeing something sacred, or too dangerous to touch. "If you want to leave, this is the moment," he said, his voice rougher than you'd ever heard it. But you didn't answer. You stepped toward him, stopping just inches away, your breath mixing with his, warm, uneven. Everything else had vanished, the palace, the rumors, the risks. Only that suspended moment remained, hanging between what had been and what had yet to be. His touch came like a question. His fingers found yours, and you gripped back, with certainty. That was all he needed. He pulled you into his arms with the force of someone who'd held back for far too long. And you gave in with the intensity of someone who'd finally accepted what couldn't be denied anymore. The kiss wasn't soft. It was urgent, charged with bottled-up emotion and restrained desire. Your bodies found each other like they recognized something ancient. He was heat and strength, the opposite of the cold restraint he showed to the world. And you were his breaking point, the crack where all the light poured through. Hours passed like seconds in that hidden room. Between whispered words, reverent hands, and gazes that said what lips hesitated to speak, you became something the desert itself couldn't erase. Later, lying side by side, the breeze drifting in through stained glass panels, he traced invisible lines on your skin with his fingertips. "You scare me," he murmured, "because you make me want things I swore I'd never want." You didn't respond. You simply placed your hand over his chest, feeling the strength of his heartbeat. That sound was the only certainty you had in that moment. But even in your deepest surrender, a part of you knew. The world outside wouldn't rest until it tore you apart. The next morning, just before sunrise, as you returned to your quarters, a letter was waiting on your bed. Heavy paper, official seal, an invitation, or more likely an order, to attend a meeting with the Sheikh's council. His touch still burned on your skin, but the power surrounding him was already moving to take him away from you. The envelope sat on the bed like it was scorching the sheets. Simple, discreet, but the golden seal of the council made it clear. The contents carried the weight of an informal empire, forged over centuries of tradition, influence, and alliances from a culture that wasn't yours. You could still feel the warmth of his lips on your skin. But now, everything around you was cold. Inside the meeting room, the air was heavy. Respected men, part of the Sheikh's inner circle, watched you with chilling calm. They weren't there to talk. They were there to remove you from his path. "You don't understand the extent of the problem you're causing," said the oldest of them, his tone polite but ruthless. "The Sheikh is not just a man. He is the face of a people. And his image influences business, treaties, and the social stability of the entire emirate." You felt a knot tighten in your throat. This wasn't just a love story. It was a game of power. And in it, you were the risk. Another advisor jumped in, sharper this time. By involving himself with a foreigner, he's sending a message of weakness to both the local and international communities. The rumors have already started. Questions are being raised. If this continues, the alliances that have upheld his family's leadership for decades will begin to crumble. You said nothing, but inside, everything hurt. They weren't accusing you of ill intent. They were turning you into a symbol of everything that wasn't allowed. Later, he found you in the inner garden, where the sound of the fountain couldn't drown out the weight of the decision looming between you. His eyes had darkened, not from anger, but from anguish. "They gave me an ultimatum," he said bluntly. "Either I end what we have, or I'll be isolated within the very structure I helped build." You took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "They can't take your power away," you said, with stubborn hope. "No, but they can erode my credibility. They can pull silent support. They can stall critical negotiations. And worse, they can turn you into a public target, and the criticism would hurt you more than anything I could ever give up." The truth was clear. He would still hold his title. But he'd lose the respect, the influence, the political and symbolic power that made people bow to his command, and all because he loved someone who didn't fit into the mold they expected of him. In the days that followed, he began to avoid you. He was there, in the halls, at ceremonies, but always distant, as if every step was carefully measured. And when his eyes met yours, it was like watching a man fall apart from the inside out. It was you who decided to leave. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom and love. On the morning of your departure, the car waited discreetly. You said goodbye to no one, just walked quietly through the same hallways that, days earlier, had witnessed the first sparks of a love that had bloomed against every rule. At the gate, an elderly woman, perhaps a trusted servant of the family, approached you. Her eyes were filled with compassion. She looked at you and said, "When love enters the heart of a man burdened by duty, he doesn't give up. But sometimes, he has to step back to protect what he loves." You wanted to believe that was a declaration of love, but you didn't know if a step back like his could ever lead forward again. That very night, social media and regional newspapers exploded with photos of you beside him. An opposing group had leaked intimate images, discreet, but enough to cause a political earthquake. Headlines ranged from scandal to cultural betrayal. Within the palace walls, the Sheikh was summoned to a meeting with the elders and leaders of influential families. They didn't demand that he resign, but they made it clear, continuing the relationship with you would be seen as a public affront to tradition and could cost the political balance that supported the entire foundation he was raised to protect. You left without looking back, thinking you were walking away from an impossible love. But on the other side of those gates, the Sheikh now faced the hardest choice of his life: preserve everything he'd been taught to protect, or risk losing it all for a love he could no longer erase. The days away from the palace were anything but peaceful. You were safe, far from the press, the cameras, and the advisors you had come to fear. But you were also far from him, and that made the silence deafening. Hours dragged on, and his absence filled the air like a scent that wouldn't fade. You felt more lost than on the day you first arrived at the palace. You tried not to follow the news, but it was impossible. Headlines flooded social media, old photos, wild speculation, countless theories. They said he had canceled diplomatic appearances, that he was being pressured by businessmen and religious leaders, that the image of him, once admired, was now questioned behind closed doors. Not for corruption, not for poor leadership, but for something far more unforgivable in the eyes of many: vulnerability, and a betrayal of local culture. Then, on the afternoon of the fourth day, as you stared out the hotel window at the arid landscape, there was a knock at the door. A soft knock. Precise. Familiar. Your body reacted before your mind could catch up. You opened the door, and there he was. That face you'd tried to forget since the day you left. He stood there. No bodyguards. No announcement, just him, with tired eyes and an expression you hadn't seen since the beginning, human. And that made your heart race like you were about to hear something that would change everything. "I needed time to think," he said. "They asked me to stay silent, advised me to pretend all of this was just a moment of male weakness, a passing lapse in judgment." Your stomach twisted. He stepped closer, slowly, respecting your space, but locking eyes with you, like he was searching for something certain, something unshakable, in you. "I didn't come here to ask you for anything, or to tie you down with promises," he went on. "But I needed to understand if what happened between us was just a moment of impulse, or something I wouldn't be able to bury, even if I tried." You took a deep breath. It still hurt. It was still risky. But what existed between the two of you hadn't been ordinary. It wasn't something distance could erase. "So, what did you decide?" you asked, keeping your voice steady, even with your heart racing. He smiled softly, for the first time in days. "I decided not to lie. Not to myself, and not to them. I told them you made me rethink where I stand. And that, for the first time, I saw who I really am. beyond the duties. You sat down slowly, feeling his words settle over your shoulders like a cloak. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no throne being abandoned, no dramatic soap opera twist. There was a man trying to find middle ground between tradition and what his heart had already chosen. "I still don't know what comes next," he admitted, sitting beside you. "But if you're willing, we can figure it out together. One step at a time, no rush, no fantasies, just truth. But I'll be honest, it won't be easy for either of us." You didn't answer right away. You just reached out your hand, and he took it gently. In that gesture, there was everything you both needed: mutual choice and willingness. And in that room, you gave yourselves to each other again, this time with more tenderness and love. The desire was still intense, fierce, but now there was something more: the desire to seal a commitment to face it all, together. In the days that followed, he returned to public life with discretion, not denying his connection to you, but not feeding into it either. He stayed away from political games, held his composure. He didn't lose respect. Instead, he gained new gazes, more human ones, from people who no longer saw just a symbol of power, but a man who dared to feel. And you stayed, not as a secret, not as a scandal, but as an undeniable presence, a woman he chose to embrace as his, even knowing the world around him would keep doubting it. Despite the criticism and some shaken alliances, he didn't have to burn everything down to choose you. He simply didn't let you go. And in doing so, you realized that sometimes true love doesn't need to fight the whole world. It just finds its place within it, even where they said there was none. Time didn't return to normal, but it found a new rhythm. You were no longer the frightened foreigner walking palace hallways. You weren't the woman hoping for an impossible love anymore. You were someone who had been truly seen, chosen, not out of convenience, not out of impulse, but out of a decision. He didn't change the world for you, but he made room for you in his, and that was more than you ever dared ask of him, or even dream. Your meetings were now quiet, intimate, sometimes a shared tea on his private terrace. Other times, a silent walk through the palace gardens beneath light filtering through the palms. There were no grand promises, no gold rings, no lavish ceremonies. There was respect, truth, and a connection that didn't need to be spoken aloud. People still whispered, some criticized, others stayed silent. But he never hid you again, never erased you, and that, coming from a man like him, meant more than any public statement ever could. One night, while watching the clear desert sky full of stars together, he asked, "Are you afraid of the future?" You thought for a moment, then answered, "No, as long as the present holds truth." He held your hand gently, and in that touch you knew. Neither of you knew where this was going, but both were ready to find out. No rush, no masks, just what was already more than enough. A love that chose to exist, even in the most unlikely place. And it was there, beneath that starry sky, with fingers intertwined and hearts steady, that you understood something deep. Love isn't about defying the impossible. It's about staying, even when everything says you shouldn't. I hope you enjoyed being the protagonist of this story, but don't leave without leaving your mark. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and share with me. What story would you love to be the main character in next time? Subscribe to the channel and come live more intense and unforgettable stories in the You Protagonist series.